Thank you, everyone. Please take your seats. Today, we remember the events that took place on September 11th, 2001, and the historic mission by Civil Air Patrol that happened the next day on September 12th. We welcome you to the museum. Tonight, we'll hear from several speakers and acknowledge the work of the Civil Air Patrol aircrew on September 12th, 2001, as they took aerial photos of the still smoking ruins of Ground Zero. Our first speaker is Mr. David Tillotson, who serves as the director of the National Museum of the United States Air Force. Mr. Tillotson manages the world's largest and oldest military aviation museum, portraying the world's heritage and traditions of the Civil Air Force through specialized exhibits. He oversees nearly 1 million square feet of exhibit space with more than 350 aerospace vehicles and missiles and thousands of other artifacts. He also provides technical and professional guidance to the United States Air Force Heritage Program, which includes more than 2,400 aerospace vehicles and over 46,000 other artifacts, on loan to nearly 780 domestic and international military heritage activities, civilian museums, cities, municipalities, and veterans organizations. Mr. Tillotson.
So first of all, thank you all for attending. I'm actually going to make my remarks very brief because you don't really want to hear from me. You want to hear from all the people who follow after me. But I do want to take a moment and thank you all for coming. I appreciate the turnout by the Civil Air Patrol, and I appreciate the opportunity that the Civil Air Patrol gave us some months ago when we had a call and said, hey, we've got something we'd like to you to consider displaying it down here. And my staff asked me, and I said, you didn't hesitate on this, right? You did say yes right from the get-go and get this down here. So they did that, and we've been very pleased to be able to continue to show more of the story of the Civil Air Patrol and its crucial role as a national asset that dates back for some time. But again, we'll have more to say about that. Let me recognize some special guests and distinguished visitors. That's kind of my part. And then I'm going to turn it over to people who are really going to talk to you about why we're here beyond me saying thank you. First of all, Ohio Senator Bob Hackett. There we are. The Assistant Deputy for Air Force Auxiliary Programs for SAF MR, Mr. John Russo. Mr. Stephen Cook from the Senator Vance's office, from the Senator J.D. Vance from the state of Ohio. Mr. Sichan Siv, former ambassador and current member here. And very pleased to recognize Major General Regina A., who is the new commander and CEO of the Civil Air Patrol. So thank you for being here. And I think your predecessor, immediate predecessor, is also here. And I'm going to apologize, I don't have the name, but thank you for being here. I know you flew the aircraft in, so thank you. And another former commander, very nice. Thank you all for being here. I think this is important, so we're glad to have you all. Mr. Brian Jarvis from the Miami Valley Military Affairs Organization. Mr. Jarvis, back here, thank you. Mr. Joseph Braden, the Ohio Auditors Organization. Here we are, thank you. And two very special guests, Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Feldman and Lieutenant Colonel Warren Ratis, who actually flew the mission on 12 September. So we're glad to have both of these gentlemen here as well. And finally, my wife, Wanda, who's sitting here in the front row. And if I don't recognize her, I'd get shot later, so I'm just saying, there you are. It's all good. Anyway, on September 11th, I actually climbed on an airplane at Boston and flew down to Washington, D.C. So that's how my day went. The good news is I was not on the wrong airplane. Wanda called me about mid-morning in the middle of a meeting and said, hey, an airplane just flew into a tower. And the rest of the day kind of went downhill, as many of you know. But I consider myself fortunate that morning and that day. And it was about 2 or 3 weeks before I got home. That's a separate conversation, but at least I could get home, so that was good. With that, let me turn it over back to the Master of Ceremonies, and we'll continue with the rest of the ceremony. But thank you all for being here. Thank you for taking time. This is important to us at the museum to continue to recognize the significant role that the Civil Air Patrol plays in our nation. Thank you.
Next, Ms. Anderson works as the research curator on the content development team. She worked in coordinating with her counterparts in collections and exhibits to assemble the exhibit on display. Ms. Anderson.
Good evening. Most of us remember where we were the morning of the terrorist attacks on 9/11. And we remember the following days as the full devastation came into focus. The display at the center of our event tonight is a reminder of that fateful day and a part of the story which shaped our nation for the next 20 years. It was the Civil Air Patrol, or CAP, that flew over New York City on September 12th to capture the first direct aerial perspective of the World Trade Center site. In the days and months ahead, CAP's volunteers would continue to provide state and federal agencies with communication and transportation support. CAP's call to aid in 2001 is one of many in which they have acted upon in service to our country for the past 80 years. In 1936, as World War II loomed, CAP's initial mobilization of American civilian aviators began. The day after the attack on Pearl Harbor, 5 years later, they started recruiting nationally. There were no limits on race or gender. The members' ability to do the job was the only consideration beyond patriotism. What began as civilian defenders patrolling the coast for German submarines developed into 3 essential missions. They are leaders in emergency services, they offer lessons promoting STEM and aerospace education, and they provide a cadet training program. The services CAP offers, the services CAP offers for emergencies have a broad scope, from search and rescue to hurricane relief. During the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic, CAP had its largest mobilization since World War II. They staffed and built field hospitals, as well as transporting supplies, blood, test kits, and later the vaccine across the country. CAP's promotion of air, space, and cyber power through aerospace education is available in a variety of STEM youth development classes that reach more than 600,000 annually. The cadet program takes that education farther. Using military-like training, CAP prepares its young members in not just aerospace education, but in fitness, leadership, and character. In 2015, General Mark A. Welsh III, then Air Force Chief of Staff, announced the Civil Air Patrol as part of the Department of the Air Force, or DAF's, total force. The symbiotic relationship between CAP and DAF has been cultivated over time. While the DAF offers funding, facility, leadership, and opportunity, the CAP can provide volunteers with a military understanding to assist airmen in their assigned duties as the DAF's official civilian auxiliary. The National Museum of the United States Air Force collects, preserves, and shares the history, heritage, and traditions of the DAF, and this includes the Civil Air Patrol. As the research curator on the content development team, it was a privilege to work alongside staff members from exhibits, collections, restoration, and others. In museums, it takes more than words to put a story on exhibit. We are honored that the Civil Air Patrol donated not just the aircraft, but the artifacts and images to help tell their story. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Mr. John Russo, the Assistant Deputy of Air Force Auxiliary Programs for the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Reserve Affairs and Airman Readiness at the Pentagon. Mr. Russo serves as the principal advisor on all matters pertaining to the Air Force's management and oversight responsibilities of Civil Air Patrol. He works closely with the CAP headquarters staff and the Board of Governors. Mr. Russo also serves as the principal advisor on all matters pertaining to the Air Force Voluntary Education Program and oversees the development and execution of Department of the Air Force chaplain policies related to the human capital portfolio, Air Force instructions, and strategic plans. In addition, he is a pilot and certified flight and ground instructor. Mr. Russo.
Well, good evening. I'm very excited to be here today, and thank you for the invitation. So being a resident of New York, September 11th seems like it just happened last week to me, even though it was 23 years ago. Hopefully my kids, your kids, will never experience the feeling we all had following the terrorist attacks on 9/11. When our nation called, so many of us stepped up to help and secure and defend our country, just like Cap did the next morning. 44 Lima and 3 crew members answered the call, jumped into action, and flew over ground zero to assess the damage. These crew members provided the first high-resolution photos of the devastation. Just like when CAP was called so many times before, the volunteers of our Air Force Auxiliary answered the call yet again. Since 9/11, Homeland Defense has evolved. Our Air Force, with the help of our Air Force Auxiliary, continues to support the training for the Defense Alert missions. CAP wings all across the country provide intercept training, essential to keeping our pilots at peak readiness. I'm happy to be here representing the Secretary of the Department of the Air Force. On behalf of the Secretary, thank you, Civil Air Patrol, and thank you, Air Force Museum, for bringing Cessna 44 Lima here, where it should be, to remind everyone who comes here about the importance of volunteering, the importance of our Air Force Auxiliary, and the important role Civil Air Patrol plays in our Air Force. We thank you for what you have done and for what you'll do tomorrow. As always, one team, one fight. Thank you.
And lastly, joining us next on stage is Major General Regina A., CAP's National Commander and CEO. Fulfilling the nonprofit organization's 3 primary programs of emergency services, cadet programs, and aerospace education. In its role as the Air Force Auxiliary, CAP is also a member of the Total Force, filling a crucial role in the defense support of civilian authorities that includes preserving life, relieving suffering, and providing training support. A college professor and mentor by trade, General A was the first CAP Chief of Education and Training. She also served most recently as CAP's National Vice Commander, in addition to being the North Central Region Commander and Vice Commander, and also Commander of the Kansas Wing.
Distinguished guests, fellow airmen, ladies and gentlemen, where were you 23 years ago today when our world changed forever? I can see from your faces and the nods that each of you has a story from that fateful day, because the events of September 11th, 2001 are etched on our collective memory. Let us observe a moment of silence for all those impacted by 9/11, and especially those who went to work that day and did not return. Today, an event that brought a nation together through tragedy brings us together again to honor, reflect, and remember. My name is Regina A., and I have the privilege of serving as Civil Air Patrol's National Commander and Chief Executive Officer, and we are the proud civilian auxiliary of the United States Air Force. The story I'm honored to tell today is about our proud volunteers who served community, state, and nation as the eyes of the home skies since a week before another fateful attack on this nation, Pearl Harbor in 1941. As you have heard, the Civil Air Patrol has 3 missions. First, we provide search and rescue, disaster response, and we support the Air Force, as well as state and federal agencies in a variety of missions that we call our Emergency Services Mission. Second, we build leaders through our cadet program, which provides meaningful experiences for 31,000 plus youth ages 12 to 21, providing them with education in areas such as leadership, fitness, character, STEM, aerospace, space, and cyber. And finally, in addition to teaching our 68,000 volunteers about air power and aerospace, we provide support and aerospace education in our communities. Civil Air Patrol's missions today have expanded as well as a result of the historic and impactful sortie of a Cessna 172 Skyhawk, tail number November 9344 Lima, also just known as 44 Lima, or CAP 912, because it flew on September 12, 2001, with a highly skilled crew on board with a very important mission: to take pictures post-attack of the World Trade Center. That historic aircraft, 44 Lima, is now proudly on display here at the National Museum of the United States Air Force. So the story I am honored to share today is the story of 44 Lima's flight on 12 September and her 3-person crew of selfless volunteers who completed a difficult mission on a tragic day. We are privileged to have 2 of the 3 aircrew members from that day with us. Joining us, we have Civil Air Patrol Lieutenant Colonel Warren Ratis, who served as the mission observer and front seat photographer, taking photos with an early Kodak digital camera and handling the radios that day on the mission. We also have Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Feldman, who was the backseat photographer using a Nikon 35mm camera. Unfortunately, Civil Air Patrol Lieutenant Colonel Jacques Heinrich, the pilot in command that day, could not be with us tonight. Gentlemen, please stand and be recognized. Thank you. There have been many articles written about 44 Lima and the mission that day. Let's continue the story of 9/12/2001. On that morning, Lieutenant Colonel Heinrich, then Captain Ratis, and Captain Feldman arrived at Long Island MacArthur Airport for a mission directed by the Governor of New York and the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Their mission: to take the first aerial photography of the lower Manhattan after the destruction of the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. After hours of coordination, as you can imagine, there was confusion. Because no civilian aircraft were allowed to fly, the crew was finally given federal approval for this mission. 44 Lima took off and flew over JFK Airport. The crew remembers it being eerily quiet that day, and then they flew on to the World Trade Center site. The flight faced numerous challenges. Colonel Heinrich navigated through smoke during the 4 passes needed to take the photos. And although the FBI and the New York State Police had been made aware of the mission, not everyone with the New York Police Department got the message. A New York Police Department helicopter tried to push 44 Lima out of the zone, intercepting them. Lieutenant Colonel Ratis and the crew would not be discouraged. Finally, the police helicopter contacted air traffic control, who assured the police that that civilian aircraft from the Civil Air Patrol had the authority to be in the zone. The helicopter backed off, and the crew continued their mission. Despite the challenges that they faced, the crew flew 4 orbits, dodging oily smoke and took 40 photographs that were transmitted to federal agencies. Their altitude during the orbits, barely 1,000 feet above the site, with some passes closer to the devastation than others so that they could get the proper perspective and the right images. Once they returned to MacArthur Airport that afternoon later, Captains Feldman and Ratis spent the night uploading photos to FEMA. Using dial-up modems, it took longer to send the images than it did to fly the mission. The pictures went to the New York State Office of Emergency Management and to the Pentagon and to the White House. Emergency Management commented that 44 Lima provided the first direct aerial perspective of the disaster site for the state of New York. Those photos were the first images we'd seen looking down at the site and showed debris on top of buildings and damage to rooftops. Some of the photographs identified where parts of attacking airplanes' cockpits ended up, allowing forensics experts to recover them and complete DNA testing to identify the attackers. Though President Bush would go to Ground Zero on September 14th, these photographs taken by Civil Air Patrol helped with situational awareness and were sent to the National Command Chain on the 13th to prepare. The mission was not without emotion for our stalwart crew. Lieutenant Colonel Heinrich has humbly said that it was just another mission. But I don't think the crew would say that. For Lieutenant Colonel Ratis, it was anything but just another mission, because he had worked at the World Trade Center on the 79th floor just a short while before this. During the mission, he had to assume that friends and colleagues that he worked with had not survived, as he dutifully took these photos. Needless to say, we had the right crew at the right time to fly 44 Lima on that historic flight that not only provided valuable information to responding agencies, but changed Civil Air Patrol and its support to the nation. The Department of Defense and other agencies, after this, recognized the added value that our volunteers bring. As a result of the mission and the 40 flights flown in support in the following days, Civil Air Patrol expanded missions transporting blood, moving medical personnel and supplies, and government officials, managing assessments of critical infrastructure, and managing requests for natural and man-made disaster photographic and video images taken from the air. Our Civil Air Patrol National Operations Center evolved into a more established nerve center for missions. We have been tasked to support numerous national events, like the 2002 Winter Olympics in Utah, and one of our longest missions pre-COVID, taking of thousands of digital images for the oil spill in the Gulf during Deepwater Horizon in 2010. Today, we provide support through a variety of air intercept and homeland security missions. On 9/11, our aerial photography members who were trained was about 100. The program was in its infancy. Today, it is a core mission for us, and we take hundreds of thousands of photos each year. Most significantly, 9/11 and our meaningful work on 9/12 inspired a new generation to serve. Civil Air Patrol grew from 58,000 members in 2001 to more than 68,000 members today. And finally, Civil Air Patrol, in August of 2015, became a member of the United States Air Force Total Force because of our contributions. Chesley Sullenberger, the pilot who landed a U.S. Air commercial flight on the Hudson River in 2009 due to an in-flight emergency, has a perfect quote to emphasize the preparedness of this crew to perform such a significant mission. Sullenberger said, "One way of looking at this might be that for 42 years, I've been making small, regular deposits in the bank of experience, education, and training, so that when that day came, on January 15th, the balance was sufficient so that I could make a very large withdrawal." The same could be said of our volunteers. For many years, Colonel Heinrich, Colonel Ratis, Colonel Feldman made small, regular deposits in the bank of experience, education, and training, so that on 9/12, their balance was sufficient so that they could make a very large withdrawal and serve community, state, and nation with distinction. And these dedicated volunteers have continued to serve. Similarly, like our amazing aircrew members who have continued their service after 9/12, 44 Lima continued to serve for more than 2 decades before General Felka, our previous national commander, flew her here to the National Museum of the United States Air Force to join their collection of historic aircraft. 44 Lima will now serve as an interactive exhibit in this great museum and help visitors remember that fateful day in our nation's history that is etched into the memories of all who experienced it. Additionally, she will continue to support the aerospace education mission by inspiring the next generation of aviators to take flight and serve with distinction through the story she helps tell, a story of service, dedication, preparedness, tragedy, and resilience. Reflecting on that day 23 years ago, my call to action for all of us is to honor those we lost on 9/11 by being who we were on 9/12. So in closing, thank you for allowing me to join you today as part of the 9/11 remembrances going on throughout our nation to recognize one of the most significant events in Civil Air Patrol history, and as well recognize the outstanding crew that is represented here and this Cessna 172 Skyhawk that flew this historic mission on 9/12/2001. And thank you to the Museum of the United States Air Force for hosting this wonderful event and representing our beloved Air Force so very well. It has been an absolute honor to speak about one of our Civil Air Patrol aircraft that is in this fantastic museum, her crew, her past, and her future. Semper Vigilance.
Ladies and gentlemen, as we conclude the ceremony, we stand in awe of the remarkable mission 44 Lima and the crew performed on September 12th. It is with appreciation to the National Museum of the United States Air Force for including this airplane, which performed a historic mission and has etched its name and CAP's role in the annals of history. Let us carry forward the spirit of this historic moment, and may this dedication serve as a reminder of the impact committed volunteers serving America's communities can accomplish as the United States Air Force Auxiliary. Thank you all for being a part of this special occasion. Safe travels and clear skies to all. And now, please join us at our reception. Thank you.